So I think most people are here now. So welcome everyone to tonight's session of the Material World event series. First, we're going to have a presentation. There will be at the end some time for questions. As usual, if you want to ask questions, please preferably use the raised hand function of Zoom. At the bottom of your screen, you will find the reactions button where you can raise your virtual hands. Don't raise your actual hand in the screen. So tonight, we're going to continue with our theme of ceramics that we kind of continue from the last session. But this time it will be Renaissance ceramics. And we have a distinct expert on that topic. Dr. Elisa Sani from the Courtauld Institute will be speaking to us. And she describes herself as an expert on the Renaissance arts of fire, which is maiolica, Venetian glass, and also Spanish lustreware. She has had a distinctive career being first curator at the Wallace collection, where she helped to organize the first ever solo exhibition of an Italian maiolica painter, Xanto Avelli. Then she was assistant curator at the V&A, where she published the Italian Renaissance maiolica again catalog. She curated the Maiolica before Raphael exhibition at San Fogg in 2017. And since 2018, she has been the research fellow at the Courtauld Institute, where she's also been preparing the catalog of their early modern ceramics, which has in fact just come out, and you should find the link in the chat where I have put it. So you can all have a look at it. Tonight, she will be speaking about Dining with Hannibal, Italian Renaissance maiolica at the table, a new look at the collection of the Courtauld. So without further ado, I hand over to Elisa.
Thank you very much, Rembrandt. And I will be showing lots of feasts tonight, but not Balthasar feasts. So I will not show that. So. But thank you for the opportunity. When I started my journey working with the Courtauld collection, I gave a talk at the Courtauld in which I was discussing the formation of the collection, how it was put together by the Victorian artist and collector Thomas Gambier-Parry, how he had a distinctive character, quite different from the great collections of maiolica that we have in London, the V&A, the British Museum, the Wallace collection. The Courtauld collection is much smaller than those three collections, with about 60 pieces of maiolica. The quality is outstanding, and but there are few historiato, which obviously form the majority of the other collection that we see. And a few historiato, or narrative wares, or ceramics painted with stories, have religious subjects rather than the Ovidian subject, which are much more common on maiolica. There are a higher number of ornamental, more decorative pieces that follow really the taste of the collector. All the information on my research on the formation of the collection is now in the catalog, and I had received much help from the curator of decorative arts of the Courtauld, Sasha Gastin, and the book itself is now in the safe hands of Paul Holberton, and hopefully it will come out in a few months. So what I would like to do tonight is something completely different. I would like to figuratively take the dishes and the vases out of their display cases and off from the wall where they're being displayed and back into the tables for which they were made. I would like to just briefly summarize what I would like to try and do. So yes, trying to find a place for this highly decorative ceramics back onto their original setting where they were first used by their owners, and looking for the presence of maiolica in paintings, as well as archival documents and published materials such as cookery books, trying to propose some suggestions for the use of some particular shapes and try to understand why particular decorations were more popular. So there's a full program here. So we should start by setting the table, I would say. As with all the material culture of the Renaissance, we tend to look for details, and no better place to find a lovely table setting than either painted cassoni or spaliera in this case. And this is no exception. It's a wonderful example. Behind the historical classical subject which is taking place, there's a very vivid and detailed representation of a table setting ready for a banquet. There is an L-shaped table. On the table, we see the bread placed as placemats, the knives, the salt cellars in the middle. Here there's forks as well, which is quite unusual throughout the 15th century and the 16th century, still in the 16th century, to have individual forks. And we have the attendants ready to receive the guests. We can see their elegant attire, how delicately they hold dishes with their hands, and all the etiquette manual of the time, the profusion of publication on the subject of splendor and dining and etiquette. They all remind how the people bringing food at the table had to be this youthful looks, elegant attire, in any way imitating the princes themselves that they had to serve. And I cannot not compare this elegant suits. So one of the most wonderful pieces of lustreware, the Courtauld, which depicts a magi. So it's a religious figure, hopefully during the Nativity, but as this elegant attire, and look how delicately he's holding this orange cup. Obviously, he's bringing us a gift with his thumb and the tip of his fingers. So in every aspect, as the attire of a guest just arriving, or even one of the attendants serving, for the magic and the splendor of the banquet taking place. If we look more closely at in the middle of the painting, we see one of the attendants. With the left, he holds a basin. With the right, he holds a ewer. Is ready to receive the guests for the ceremonial rinsing of the hands. In all cookery books throughout the 16th century, they mention the opening of the banquet with the rinsing of the hands with aromatic waters. We have this type of ceramics, which is more akin of metal. Obviously, metal was what is shown in the cassone, that has really the same sheen of metal, but also has the same property of this very clear, smooth surface, ideal for water. And this made me wonder that the high survival of examples of ewer and basin made of lustreware would make them quite common for this use. I'm showing on the screen on the right two examples of basins made in Spain at the beginning of the 16th century, which at the center they have a boss or emplacement where the ewer could be firmly in place in the middle. Spanish luster obviously is very important for the development of Italian lusterware, because it was the fashion for lusterware from Spain, particularly for the Valencia region, throughout the 13th and 14th and 15th century. They made the Italian potter compete with them and succeed in finding this technique. And so we see on the lower part of the screen a sample of one or two ewers at the Courtauld, made at the Ruta in Luster, and look at the shape, how closely imitates the shape of metal. And on the right, there's a ewer and basin at the British Museum. It actually is a very useful photo of how it would originally have been used on once not in use. On the left-hand side of the screen, there's the credenza and the metalwork beautifully displayed on a tiered piece of furniture, which infallibly is depicted in metal and very rarely on ceramics. One key element that we find on the table would be also, apart from water, would be wine. There's a particular fashion for jugs with coat of arms of Florentine families that really from the 15th century throughout the 16th century is quite unique, and it doesn't really happen in any other center of production of the route of Faenza, Urbino. There's this fashion for having your arms displayed prominently on a jug. And I'm showing here on the left a rather more disturbed dining setting, actually with a terribly gory story of this maiden being torn apart by the dogs and followed by a knight. So really a nightmare, really party, as you can imagine. The scene is really not happening. It's just a representation of this vision that the Saggio degli Onesti had in the pine woods, just to show how to warn his beloved. You can see the standing up in horror on the left, to not to follow the behavior of the unfortunate maiden, to refuse or rebuke as suitor as she did. On the table, we see an array quite similarly to the display that we saw earlier. Obviously here there's a lot of broken crockery and glasses, obviously in the commotion of the event. But one particular detail which I always like to see is just on top of the spalliera behind the guest, there are coat of arms pinned onto the seemingly the trees. We see prominent coat of arms, the Pucci family. In the middle is the Medici family, rulers of Florence. On the right, there's the coat of arms of the Pucci, and that of the Bini is probably made, Spalliera Pane made for a union of these two Florentine families. This presence of obviously the Medici remind me how many times we see on the arms onto pieces of ceramics, particularly on tableware, and particularly on jug. We know that they were not just ordered by the family. For instance, around 1460, the Medici themselves ordered Spanish lustreware from Spain. This might be an example shown the right there. But in a sort of more dining context, this is the only sort of representation. And I found finding an armorial jugs near a contents of a table, perhaps with Medici arms, just under a big basin. We see three jugs with a larger one in the middle, so maybe more of a context related to dining. We know that jug with Medici arms were not just used by the family. We have a wonderful document related to the Republic of Florence during the Republic, with Pietro Soderini, which is the Gonfaloniere, the head of the Republic after the fall of the Medici in 1504. He ordered the destruction of all pottery with Medici arms. And he explains why: in order to suppress the devotion and preference for the Medici family that the artisans tend to have, and they keep them in their homes. That shows us really at all levels of society how the presence of having pottery and jugs and tableware of Queen Medici arms would be important. That takes me to a nice, very nice example that is in the Courtauld collection. We find here in the middle of the screen, shows the Medici arms again, and has the detail of the fluttering ribbons all around it. And that, I think, is just a memory of how those arms were displayed at banquets, attached to ribbons and during festivities. And also, we also find wreaths of verdura, of pine cones and fruit and flowers, or cornucopias in this case, similar to the decoration that we find in dining banquets. This particular example had the top of the spout is completely broken, so perhaps it did to take part of one of those more wild parties than happened to it. This particular one is interesting because he has the coronet on top of the arms. That is the crown used by the dukes of Florence. So they are pre-becoming Grand Dukes in 15, when Cosimo I becomes Grand Dukes in 1569. So we can place them fairly correctly just before that date. What is interesting is also it has on the side of just outside the blue, at the center of the round over the arms, as a little branch, and that might have been a personal device by the Medici, who loved devices. And we see the same emblem on another wonderful jug on the left of the screen, made for Leo X, so earlier, for the Pope, the first Medici Pope, which has the same device of little branches sprouting all over the decoration. And we see it also on another piece at the V&A, which has the same ducal arms. Even if these pieces were not actually used by Duke Cosimo or the Pope Leo X, the presence of devices and not just the arms make them perhaps closer to them than some of the other pieces. We might imagine them being displayed in rooms in which the court was also present, and the proudness of those arms for what the message they convey is always quite striking and jolly. But what was eaten on the table? Yeah. Oops, I'm now stopped. See if I can move it forward. Had a nice setting at the table with the court of Ferrara at the beginning of the century. See if I can move it. I'll close that. And yes, there we go. Sorry. Considering the dining habits throughout the 16th century, but also in the latter part of the 15th century, the Este court of Ferrara represent the highest, really, most refined, really possible culture and etiquette for dining that existed in Italy at the time. Some of you might not know, the Banquets is a wonderful book written by Cristoforo Messisburgo, in which there are hundreds of wonderful recipes, but at the beginning it starts with some wonderful accounts of some banquets. And those banquets are the banquets of the Este court, and the banquets that they have on very special occasions, such as weddings, or when ambassadors will come to visit. And they really very vividly show how this special and magic event would take place. Among the many courses, there will be musicians playing, as we see here in this painting by Garofalo. On the left-hand side of the screen, we see the musician and the singers ready to come entertain the guests. There would be the scalco, really the impresario, the rainmaker of the whole of the banquet organization, suggesting and moving all the staff as really chessboards and with military precision. You can see here in the center, the scalco directing the servants to the table. But if we look at the table itself, we see something different from what we saw in the settings before. Everyone has their own plate. And this is something which obviously we are so used to it, we don't see it as a novelty. This actually was quite a new thing. It was introduced, say, at the end of the 15th century, the individual plate. We're talking about plate, really as we know it now. Plate means really flat, piatto, of 20 to 30 centimeters of diameter. And this they had a great impact on dining habits, but also had a great impact on maiolica production. You can see how the demand for many more plates start appearing. I mentioned Messi Bugo before, and he mentions the quantities of this plate, so hundreds and hundreds of plates, never mentioning obviously any decoration, any information about what, very frustrating for us, about what they are. But he mentions this piattelli, piattini, this individual plate coming through. We can see, in fact, the plate, perhaps they are metal, perhaps maybe ceramics, but we know that at the court, at the Este court, ceramics was quite prominent. And when perhaps during a banquet, an official banquet, only the main principal table, the first table, would have metal. Many of the other ones would have ceramics. Many would have coat of arms on the ceramics, and or really painted with the colors, so the people celebrated, as we have accounts a bit later, around the 1560s. But I'm particularly interested in the type of ceramics they might have used and enjoyed at the court, at the Ferrara court, for specifically for this dish here, which is the Courtauld. And this is lovely example of those tondi or piatti that began to be fashionable about 20 centimeters. Here we have a lovely border, ornamental border of grotesques, a very fashionable decoration from the 16th century. We have little cherubs with wings. In the middle, we have a little saint. It's very delicate. There's also a bianco sopra bianco, white on white ornament around. And as a saint, which is SL, but it's not St. Lucy. And some research for the catalogue, I felt fairly confident to suggest that she might be St. Lucretia and Merida, for some similarities with a painting by Dosso Dossi, who worked at the court of Ferrara, also worked to make designs for the potter. So it's tantalizing, and we have very few information. But then there's something which made them make this perhaps a bit closer to the court by the found of a lovely dish, also on orange ground, with a little figure found actually in the castle at Ferrara. I just want to stress the rarity of finding high quality ceramics underground. There are enormous quantities of ceramics of sort of daily use with sketchy or simple decoration or no decoration at all, which are found, but ornamental high quality are much rarer. And when they're found in locations such as this, obviously they must have been used at the court. We know that there was a pottery, there was a kiln in the court, in the palace. We know that Alfonso, Duke of Duke of Ferrara had a great fascination with ceramics. Piccolo Passo mentioned that he was experimenting with ceramics and even invented the white. And this dish is really made with white, very, very white ground. So tantalizing a tondino, a plate perhaps introduced at the court when these things were a great novelty. And just want to show the other plates from this set, just to see the quality of them. We are lucky to have them all four in London. They all have saints in the middle and this beautiful grotesque border. They have this mysterious mark on the reverse with an I and a P. And perhaps one day we might be able to display them together to tell a bit more of the story. Thinking about shapes, now that you see the reverse, you can appreciate better the type of shape, which in Italian is called tondino, that the dish is made of. It's a very small ball, like in the cup of the hand, and has a white rim, quite a white, it's a cardinal's hat shape in English. And that sort of shape is quite distinctive, it's quite fashionable about the 1520s. This is perhaps one of the few paintings I've seen that shows a similar shape. You can see the profile on the right of the dish is a metal, perhaps pewter or silver plate in the supper and mouse. You can see the little boy on the left is holding the rim. You can see the rim is quite wide. And obviously we don't see what's inside because Jesus is about to break the bread onto it. But you can see the distinctive shape, and that's the shape that comes into being around 1520, really, from 1510 to 1520. Famously, the tondino shape is used in some of the dishes from the set painted by Nicola da Urbino. We see an example on the right for Isabella d'Este. And scholars of up until the 1960s, 1970s, such as Bernard Rackham, they went as far as justifying the development of these shapes, such as the tondino, because the maiolica painter needed more space to draw, to paint. And so the function of the shape was completely not taken into account by historians at all. And but we know that really the truth was the opposite. And we know, for instance, that Clement VII, another Medici Pope, when asked if he did enjoy eating off plates painted with figures, he would reply, "Oh, well, I do enjoy eating them with cardinals." But then once he's asked what type of things he liked, his calco, his personal assistant, make a very long and precise list of the shapes he wants. And so obviously shape was a very important thing. And Clemens preferred eating off white on white dishes when he was on his own. And I found a later painting about the 1580s, which perhaps shows, suggests what might have been eaten in this sort of shape. Is a painting by Alessandro Lori, which is one of my favorite paintings for his love of detailing, especially particularly when representing ceramics. Is a medieval interpretation of the prophecies of Isaiah, and shows two angels giving honey and butter, curd, to Jesus. You can see from the way the angels hold the plate that they have a small cup in their hands with a wide brim. And what more beautiful to eat honey or butter from this lovely dish, and which, by the way, is completely perfect condition. There's no sign of scratches. And this is something we find quite often, the lack of scratches. But as I said at the beginning, the use of fork was actually quite limited. And so we would not find many scratches anyway. Considering other beautifully ornaments on dishes, tondini, the tondini that we now start perhaps using the Italian word, or broad-rimmed bowl, as they are, is another wonderful ornamental piece in the Courtauld collection. There's a Courtauld playing in the middle, a little angel, a little Cupid, and on the border there are hooks, there are sails, there are nails, there are locks, like a maritime really thing going on around it. And while studying and researching the meaning of this, as it could be reference to families, there could be reference hermetical symbols, really shows, it looks like a type of dish that might have been, it could be well researched in a workbook. I was had the luck of coming across this wonderful discovery of a dish that has the same border around it. Found location is unknown, but the fact that it's being found in the wastes of the castle is just again a lovely reminder, if not where the plate was made, because obviously the commissions could travel across Italy and abroad, so it does not necessarily it was made near Grosseto, Sorano, the castello of the family of the Ottieri, where it was found, but that those things were used and then they were discarded and ended down in wastes with the bones and all the other refuse. So it makes it closer to us, thinking that we actually those things were to be used. And one type of this is the back, which is not very exciting, where it shows again this particular shape. One type of ceramics which for a long time have been thought of as not used at the table, for the reasons I explained before, and for the fact that we tend to study historiato as really a branch of art history and tend to distinguish the ends of the painter, losing perhaps often track of what they were made for initially and how they were used. This is particularly interesting, this the only piece of classical history subject there is in the Courtauld. All the other ones are religious, as I said, and shows an episode of military classical history, the Second Punic War. Excuse me, Hannibal has just been elected general. For a long time, the scene on this dish was mysterious because the inscription on the back, and often historiato has inscriptions on the back to help us understand what's going on the front, had been completely covered or partially covered by the foot. It's a molded bowl, quite imposing molded bowl, about 35 centimeter diameter. When the potter went to attach the foot with liquid clay, covered part of an inscription. And well, that's just obviously an hypothesis. What I think it covered was a crucial word, Hannibal. And that makes read the inscription, Hannibal è morto Sdrubale guerriero, eletto capitan del Peno. We don't know the final word, unfortunately, but the fact that it's not Asdrubal, the key figure, but it's Hannibal. And that is quite important because there's a very famous set called the Hannibal service, in which has inscriptions all starting with the word Hannibal. And I believe that also that particular mold bowl is part of the same set. This set is one of the most imposing known in Storiato Maiolica, has pieces that all have the scaplets of rhyming inscriptions about Hannibal. they describe in great detail the campaign of Hannibal from Spain into Italy. And some of them have numbers, and some of the very high number, up to 147, tell us how many pieces there were originally in the series. Some of the pieces also, like the one on the left, on the lower part of the screen, they have like a ghostly shadow of a coat of arms. It was never painted. So it was a commission, obviously incredibly demanding set, with probably an artist providing designs, a poet, a humanist suggesting the inscriptions, and the pottery painter working, perhaps several pottery painters working on this demanding set. But we don't know who actually commissioned it. The fact that the Courtauld ball corresponds with an entry in the inventory of the 1784 inventory of the ducal, the Grand Ducal palace of the Medici, well, the Grand Ducal of the Medici Lorena at the time, shows a number that is the number that actually appears here on the right hand side of the screen in the lower part in the Courtauld ball. And luckily this has never been cleaned, so I cannot be more grateful to the Courtauld staff over the years for not taking this number off. And then they tell us the detail of the inscription. The unique subject of this, obviously recognizing Hannibal fatto capitano, shows that it has to be this particular ball. And the fate of having the foot covered by the description covered by the foot has also happened to another ball, which also corresponds in the inventory of the Grand Ducal Palace. And this is really mounting up a big evidence about the Hannibal set being made for the Medici. As we know, lovers of ceramics of all types. And obviously, what a gift for obviously commanders and princes that wanted to be perceived as classical heroes of the time. Because I'm particularly interested in shapes, I always wonder what this type of ball would have been used for. He has the wonderful molding, and actually these two balls are the only one in a very vast array of dishes and flat dishes. So it's much, it's a lot more different than the rest of the set. Normally for molded balls like this, we think of them as fruttiera, for frutta. We see here some example of representation of molded dishes. And it's just the subject does not really fit with being a dish for fruit. So going back to the reading of the inventory of the Granducal Palace, it says una coppa sottocoppa scannellata. Sottocoppa meaning sort of under a cup, a bowl for a cup. I went again to look at my friend Alessandro Alloi to find one of the most beautiful decoration in the fresco de Villa Medici a Poggio Chigliano, one of the many generations of Florentine artists that have worked there, to find a detail I have here on the right of an attendant holding a bowl under a cup, a sottocoppa. So this just a suggestion of another story, perhaps another use for those bowls. The Hannibal piece has a boss in the middle, so I can imagine him being perhaps having a cup sitting on top. Obviously, what type of cup? Here is glass, and there are other examples that shows a representation of bowls over glasses, and that could be a nice alternative for this type of wares. Following the trend of drinking out of maiolica, I went to look a bit more at the shapes. Particularly, I was interested in the foot, thinking about the foot. Why did they have to attach the heavy foot to the bowl? Could they not have a smaller foot? But if you are actually using the foot for holding a bowl, then it's much better to have that sort of shape. So I want to make another villa decoration, because for the best parties always took place in villas in the Renaissance, and finding a Villa Farnesina with the memorable parties by Agostino Chigi is the place to look for. And I found in the Council of the Gods on the left, we can see Venus handing, or Mercury handed over a bowl, which it does look exactly like a footed bowl for drinking. It's another part of the fresco as well, in which the same, perhaps Jupiter, another god, is handed over a bowl with this gesture holding the rim like that for balancing. And this sort of wedding banquets, they are represented sometimes on those bowls themselves. So perhaps used for eating, but it's also fascinating, perhaps that on occasion they might have been used also for drinking. And last example is Michelangelo. And Michelangelo shows in the drunkenness of Noah, shows Noah in a sort of shame with a jug next to a footed bowl, clearly used for drinking out of the jug. So I'm developing more and more ideas about drinking with maiolica than eating with maiolica at the moment, or at least for some example. Remember that many bowls have very, very thin bodied, and this obviously is quite can make it quite suitable for drinking out of. One particular piece which is very difficult to find a use for is one of the masterpieces of the Courtauld. This beautiful bowl on high foot with the scene of the crucifixion in the middle. It's just a wonderful piece, full of candent colors and so many figures, and has a black blue-black ink sky and blue mountains and green and oranges and blues. It's just fantastic. Also, a very rare feature of having the underside completely decorated with angels, with the symbols of the Passion. It's so rare to find that the continuation of the scene seen on the front, also on the underside. The spectacular piece also has kept its foot, as many of the similar shape have lost it. So we see this perfect example of this type of wear. It's tantalizing to suggest use it, but it's also very, very scary as well, and worrying, because you would not want to eat or drink out of a dish with Christ on the cross. It seems completely inappropriate to paint that scene or something destined for the table. Well, I was facilitated in trying to find a solution for this by another example of religious maiolica, for which John Mallet has found a solution of, which has worried and occupied scholars of material culture for many generations. Is a famous dish with David and Goliath at the Louvre, which has the arms of Cardinal Duprat. Is from a set made in 1535 in the workshop of Guido Durantino. On its underside, it has this unusual spout, which is really unique. There's no other piece with this feature. So there's a hole just at the bottom, in the lower part where the water runs on the dish. And the spout corresponds to the on the underside. John Mallet beautifully solved this problem for us by suggesting an association with ablution dishes of precious metal that they were used in pairs in the Renaissance. One we used by the priest to rinse his hand before the Mass, and underneath would be a matching one without a spout to collect the water pouring. So a wonderful use found for this dish. As for the crucifixion, obviously still remain a problem to be solved. And metalwork was obviously more commonly used for the Mass. And this creates obviously a problem, but certainly the fact that this dish itself has been identified, use has been identified, in sort of promising that we might one day find also a use for the crucifixion. As for other pieces with the same shape, we found it used at the table, although again it's a religious ceremony, but it's really what is a most splendid banquet taking place in Venice, or the marriage at Cana by Veronese, the splendid, enormous canvas now in the Louvre, made for a refectory of church in Venice. Well, the guests, all of the guests, you can see overall the whole of the table, they all eat off this sort of shape, a footed bowl on eye. We can see in this detail on the side that is the end of the party. They all have confetti or sugar-coated almonds or fruit, and they have candied fruit sticking out of their plate. We also notice towards the end, because the lady on the blue towards the end of the table has a stecco di vaniglia, like a vanilla pod cleaned teeth. So we know that. And we can see the array of dishes, many of them footed like that. So for other dishes with the same shape, we can confidently say that they were used for sweet meats and for confetture, as it's called in Italian, for fruits and sweets at the end of the meal. For other religious historiati of the Courtauld, the use is somewhat less complicated. And these are two examples. On the left is the gathering of the manna, the lovely little tondo. On the right, a deeper bowl with the crossing of the Red Sea. And I say the use is less complicated, and this is because the gathering of the manna with its subject related to food and to plenty has obviously, we can conceivably see its uses at the table, but also because of the frequency with this subject appears on maiolica. On the right, the crossing of the Red Sea seems perhaps a bit less suitable for the same. But then researching the subject, it does appear constantly on wine coolers. So in this case, the presence of the water, the subject itself, make it suitable. So perhaps a dish containing water. And it is a deeper bowl than many. You can see the shape here. So perhaps for washing hands or rinsing hands, while as well wine cooler. So in this case, the religious subject are actually quite close to a dining situation. We can imagine them easily on the table. We know that religious subjects appear from the second part of the 16th century, when obviously after the Council of Trento, there was a different sort of feeling of religiosity throughout the Catholicism, obviously the Catholic world. And this obviously reflects also on the subject used on maiolica. So how about the Ovidian subject then? As I said at the beginning, the Gambier-Parry collection does not have one single example of mythical stories which so often often decorate Historiato. But thanks to the generosity of St. Fogg through the cultural gift scheme, we have now an example in the Courtauld and see Diana and Action. Diana and Action is the most common subject on Historiato, and I always wonder why. There are hundreds of pieces with the subject, and it makes you wonder why this particular subject was common. Even the first example of narrative scenes on piece of maiolica, this wonderful dish at Bath with Diana and nymphs into this beautiful fountain around this wonderful border with centaurs as this representation. And again, looking at contemporary accounts of parties, we know that obviously Diana was seen as obviously the goddess of chastity, and as such was a very appropriate element for wedding banquets. And actresses dressed as Diana would come and talk to the bride-to-be, and even bring stags to be offered to the bride as the occasion of the famous account of the wedding party of the Barbe Gonzio Botta, Tortona. And also he appears extensively on decoration of bedchambers, and also it was appropriate for the consumption of meat as a subject, be given the great importance of roast and stags. And often stags were presenting to the table as alive, covered in their own skin, while inside there would be the roast meat offered. So it's rather atrocious, was what was very fashionable. So perhaps we have found a solution to the popularity of this particular subject. I talk about the Council of Trento, how it somewhat changes the subject of maiolica as well. And we know that certainly by the 1580s, Historiato became less popular. We know, for instance, that these two serious people, they appears on the right-hand side of the screen, which is the Duke and Duchess of Bavaria. Wilhelm V of Wittelsbach and his wife did not want pagan mythology on their ceramics. When on a visit to Urbino, the Duke was given a set of maiolica by the Duke of Urbino, Francesco Maria II, as a gift. Went back home, his wife loved it, he wanted more. So he went back to the Duke, and his secretary specified that really he should not, the painters have to be warned not to put anything inappropriate, alcuna cosa che tenga del disonesto. So this is quite interesting, because the set, of which very few pieces are left, including this damaged ewer and the Courtauld on the left-hand side of the screen, are actually grotesque. So they're pagan mythology, they're still mythology, but obviously this was not considered to be any way offensive, any way of pagan pagan nature, which is quite interesting. We have a very detailed account of the set, and we know that probably the ewer was a cruet for oil or vinegar. Similar, perhaps in shape, to the cider piece from the same set, which survives in the V&A. So unfortunately, very damaged. It's really a wonderful survival of this changing of taste that was happening at that time. The testimony of the dukes, they did prefer this because they saw this as more appropriate. It's quite interesting. We can imagine a table all set with wonderful grotesques here on white ground for this wonderful Last Supper, again by Allori, in which shows incredible detail, shows all the decorations on this table. And we can see the stunning display they would have make at the table, this type of sets. You can see the very, very detailed, this wonderful shape of dishes, really in the mannerist fashion that they still survive today, this type of dish for so detailed. And a great fashion for white ground grotesques makes it suitable for gifts that the Dukes of Urbino sent to Philip II of Spain, and to also cardinals and ambassadors, as really the best of the production that they could provide. It was wonderful examples. Towards the end of the 16th century, another type of maiolica became really fashionable at the table. It's perhaps surprising for us because obviously it's so close to what we use now. But the Bianchi Revolution, the white wares made first of Faenza around the 1540s, were really a great discovery. It's a very thick glaze. It's very shiny, very clean, and was really so immediately successful for eating. And sets of Faenza white were made in all sorts of shapes. We have this wonderful salt at the Courtauld on the top, on the left, which has really everything mannerist you could possibly have. There's the hoofs of a goat, there's masks, there are horns, and this is typical of this inventiveness of Faenza white, and it was particularly suitable for great parties. We have memories again of the Dukes of Ferrara having wedding banquets in which they ordered from Faenza all sorts of incredibly shapes, including fountains, all made of Faenza white. They seem to be particularly suitable for fruit and for sweets. That's what they say, at the table of the princes. But there are wonderful memories of banquets such as that made for Alfonso II of Este, marrying his second wife, Barbara of Austria, in which the whole of the banquet was transformed into a sort of seascape in which all the walls and the ceiling was painted blue, and all the servants at the table were dressed as tritons, with a wonderful triumph of Neptune is taking place, where all the dishes are shell-shaped. And I cannot not connect the three pieces on the right-hand side of the screen, a salt cellar and maybe a wash basin, to what was made there for those banquets. We can imagine those wonderful shapes of made of white, quite close to another very popular fashion of the time of having sugar sculptures. And we can see an account here, the sugar banquet made for a wedding in Germany, in which all the shapes made on the table are all made of sugar. And constantly in banquets made in Italy throughout the 16th century, the sugar sculpture, often made as gods and goddesses and nymphs, appear constantly. So we can see a varied picture of many creative accounts of how maiolica was used up until the 16th century. After we found the white, the lack of decoration, but the shape triumphant, really. So just in conclusion, another perhaps unusual party, and the Battle of the Lapis in the Center on the Spalliera panel by Piero di Cosimo. It is it's like a picnic gone wrong. We know the story is obviously a classical myth from Ovid, how the Lapis invited unwisely the Centaurs for a wedding banquet ovipotamia and piritus, and things went wrong, and the centers drank too much, and where a battle ensued. They were trying to abduct the bride Hippodamia. So for the same reason why patrons in Tuscany around this time would want to have this sort of decoration in their bedrooms, there were patrons of very, very reputable families that wanted the same decoration on their dishes. And as we can see here, the same scene is of the banquet gone wrong is shown in a bowl by the Apollo basin with the arms of the Vitelli family. Or below, there's another rendering of the same banquet with the arms of the historian Francesco Guicciardini and his wife Maria Salviati. Perhaps the reason why people wanted to use these scenes in the dining hall is lost for us. So we can make many suggestions on why they were using them, the battle between the wild and the civilization, or just simply just to show how classically trained they were or they knew. But still, they really are testimonies of the wonderful dining banquets that took place in the Renaissance, how much more was at stake than just eating at this time. Grazie mille.
Well, thank you very much for an extremely rich, lavish banquet of maiolica that was served to us tonight. I assume there must be questions. If people want to ask questions, as I said right at the beginning, preferably use the raised hand function. At the bottom of your screen, you will find the reactions button where you can raise your hand, and then I can try and unmute you and you can ask your question. I have some questions myself as well. To begin with, just about the Courtauld collection, because you mentioned that this collection is different from the other main maiolica collections you find in London, primarily because you only find religious subjects. I was kind of intrigued by that. Is that because of a particular taste of the collector, or is it because of the time at which the pieces were collected, that perhaps other pieces were already off the market?
Yes, so it's precisely the first reason you mentioned. It was the taste of the collector. Gambiapali was particularly a religious man. He was also an artist of religious decoration. I was particularly interested in decorating churches for religious scenes. And so I really think he was seeking this particular type specifically. He wasn't just randomly buying it. They were just something he was particularly interested, because also they are a lot less in quantity than the pagan subjects to find.
It's just been suggested, by the way, that maybe you should stop sharing your screen so that we can
of course.
Have a slightly
yeah, so we can all see everyone. That's much better.
See each other better.
But thank you all for coming. I can see now since
So yes, I have at least one question from the audience here. Let me see if I can. So Catherine Hunter, I'll ask you to unmute if you can.
Hi. Thank you so much. That was an absolutely fascinating talk. I was really interested in the comments that you made about the Medici jugs at the beginning and how they all had branches on. And I was just wondering if you knew why in particular kind of they might have gone for this very sort of natural detail rather than something else.
Yeah. Well, I think the display of arms within rites, like a celebratory house was done for ephemeral decoration, might be of inspiration. They were really, the presence of them is really us to say viva, long live. So what better than having live things around it, and symbols of plenty, symbols of magnificence. I hope I answer your question.
Any other questions? I mean, I have some more actually. Right at the beginning, in one of the Spaliera panels or Casone panels, you showed a banquet scene that had basically had a lay table, but it also had a credenza in the back. We tend to associate the credenza more with sort of metalware, with silverware. So is there evidence that the maiolica was also displayed purely for a display function on a credenza?
Well, towards the end of the 16th century, there's occurrence of banquets in which there's two credenzas, one with metalwork and one with ceramics decorated with porcelain motifs or porcelain itself, in a banquet in Rome. But that's quite a rare occurrence, and but visually, there've been some reconstruction by some scholars for sets that actually the subject correspond to each other, and so they were probably designed to be displayed on a credenza and then taken off a credenza when used. But certainly, yes, the presence, especially in paintings, is constantly of metalwork. Also, if you are a late 15th century artist, were paid to paint something with gold, you had to use it in a way. You could not use it.
Yeah, it's always the question, of course, how reliable paintings ultimately are as documentation.
Yeah.
So painters had indeed their own motives for depicting certain things and not others. But
yeah.
And one other question I had is that is there any evidence from the sources that all these beautiful subjects that you see on the plates and dishes, etc., that they were actually a subject of table discussion, that when the fruits would be eaten from the plate, that and the scene gradually revealed, that people then might discuss what you see on the plate?
I'm sure there must have been use or discussion. Obviously, conversazione was another major important. I did not discuss obviously the convito was all about discussing and talking. So there must have been a purpose for a chance for talking, obviously given by the subject represented. But themselves, there might have been, as example, like the dishes with saints, for Lucrezia Borgia might have read, but using a dish with a saint might have helped her to, with her religiosity, in a way, in which we can't obviously prove it today, but we can make suggestions on the different uses. I don't know if I can see Tim Wilson is there. Perhaps he has some ideas on the conversazione. I saw you.
Rembrandt, I'm to invite him to unmute.
I'll see if I can find him quickly and unmute. Yes, just a second. Here he is. Let's see. Ask to unmute.
Mute. Si sente?
I am trying, but it doesn't seem to work.
Ecco.
That should be better. Sorry.
Yes.
I don't know of any direct evidence of maiolica used like that, but there's a lovely passage of Bandello. I'm visiting the court of, I think, Eleonora Gonzaga, the Castiglione lady, but it might have been Isabella d'Este. And after dinner, a discussion took place about whether Lucretia had been right to commit suicide. Now, Lucretia is certainly a subject that turns up quite often in maiolica. So while there isn't in that case a direct link to what was on the plates, I think it shows the kind of context in which they could use to give rise to that kind of conversation.
Yes, I see. Yes. Thank you. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yeah, I see one more. So I have Lisa, if you can unmute yourself.
Okay, I think I've got it. Thank you. Thank you, Elisa. This was a lovely talk. I really enjoyed the focus on the different shapes and so many wonderful paintings. I was really interested in the quote about how they were supposed to destroy the Medici pottery, how the Gonfoniere declared that they should do that. And I'm interested in evidence about if families would collect maiolica with the coat of arms of families that they supported, like did they collect the coat of arms of the Medici if they were a family that supported the Medici, or did people only collect the dishes that had their own coat of arms on it? Could you speak a bit more on that?
Well, thank you, Lisa. So nice to see you. Well, there's another similar occurrence of pottery being destroyed for the Bentivoglio in Bologna. And the Bentivoglio fall, there's a similar episode in which the potters and the sellers of pots, they are beaten up and the wares destroyed because they were trying to sell them, you know, the pots with the Bentivoglio arms in Bologna. So obviously this was quite an important way of displaying the support for a particular family, and I wish we knew more about it, certainly. We have, for instance, the Ruta potters tend to produce a lot of dishes with the arms of the popes, because obviously the Ruta is within the papal states. So there might be more. We could read more of the sort of political point of view. You know, maiolica, you know, different use, and obviously maiolica is ideal for tinctures, for the colors that you can very brightly and fairly cheaply reproduce and show your support for a particular family.
Right. Well, if there are no further questions, then all that remains for me is to thank again Elisa very much for a wonderful presentation. I've certainly seen many wonderful examples and learned a lot from tonight. And thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for coming.
Well, that's my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.